listeners. My name is Earl Breon. I am the host of the Burden of Command podcast. Today, my guest is Mr. Joe Calloway. Joe is a fellow Tennessean, fellow Predators fan, go Preds, and yes. He is an author of several books. I'm going to just name about 3 of them here, and I highly encourage you all to go check out the rest. Leadership Mindset, Keep It Simple, and Becoming a Category of One. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on, Earl.
Yeah, no, and as I was talking when we were setting up for this, our mutual friends, Jim Bouchard and Alexander Armstrong, kind of thought we'd make a good conversational duo here. So we're going to have them on in a couple episodes. I'm excited about that. So
they're great. They are absolutely great.
Yeah, absolutely. I love them to death. So, well, let's go ahead and get started with the first question I ask all my guests.
Sure.
The phrase burden of command, what does that mean to you?
You know, it's interesting. When I first heard that and that was the name of your show, I had a little bit of a negative reaction to burden. And I thought, well, God, you don't want to call it a burden. Now, wouldn't you want to go with responsibility, something a little more positive? But then the more I thought about it, and I like it because it is, I think, a really thought-provoking phrase. There is an element of a burden that goes with command and that goes with leadership. And so I think that it goes along with responsibility in that any leader who truly is a servant-oriented leader is going to feel that really strong, powerful level of responsibility. And it is a sense of a burden of command, because when you're in command, so much depends on you. And so I ended up really liking the phrase because it made me think.
Well, good. That's what I'm hoping is this podcast makes people think. And I like that because, it does. It's in my experiences, my background being in the Marines, we use that phrase quite a bit in the military, burden of command. And that was what it was meant to be, was to convey that responsibility, that as a leader, your actions have the ultimate responsibility for everybody under your command, as we called it in the military. Yep. And I get a lot of reactions like that when I talk about it in the civilian world. And we kind of come back to where you got there with the responsibility. And that's why I wanted to name the show Burden of Command, because I wanted everybody to really go through that process and think about it. And so I've gotten some really good answers so far. And I really like how you process it. So thank you for that.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, your answer and coming in there, it kind of comes into, and I think this is another reason why Jim and Alex thought we'd hit it off, is a lot of your work, from what I've been able to gather from reading the books and looking at interviews, you put a real focus on simplicity. Yeah. And I love that. So why is simplicity such a powerful thing?
I tell you why I ended up really zeroing in on that is one of my key principles that I work with leadership groups on, is because during the course of my career, which is 30 plus years, I've gotten to work with some really, really excellent, really effective leaders from all kinds of companies and all kinds of organizations. And what always fascinated me, was to look for the threads of commonality. What is it that really good, effective leaders have in common? And one of them that kept coming up for me was that an effective leader is able to simplify the complicated. When you look at ineffective leaders, very often that ineffectiveness comes from their team, their organization. They're not clear on what's expected of them, on what the vision is, on what the goal is, on what the strategy is, on what the tactics are. There's a lot of lack of clarity. And then when you flip that and look at really effective organizations, the leader is able to simplify so that everybody goes, I get it. I understand where we're going. I understand how we're going to get there. And I understand what's expected of me. So it just really kept jumping out at me as a core leadership responsibility to be able to simplify the complicated.
Yeah, and it's I mean, again, it's such a powerful concept. I mean, you have people. Albert Einstein was famous for saying, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think that's what it boils down to. It's like it's very easy, and I run into this all the time myself. It's very easy to overcomplicate simple. It's a lot harder to simplify the complicated.
I talk about that all the time. People will say, well, why do we make things complicated? And you just gave my exact answer. I say the reason we make things complicated is because it's so easy to make things complicated. Any knucklehead can make something complicated, but to take a situation that is challenging, and particularly one that's challenging in its kind of innate complexity, and then simplify that, man, that's a powerful thing. And when you look, I mean, we just look at, I'll be working with a leadership group, and I'll say, let me ask you guys, in your experience, which is almost always the most effective answer, the most effective solution, the simple one or the complicated one? And of course, they all say it's the simple one. But you're dead on the money, and I agree 100%. We complicate because it's easy.
Yeah. Well, and so I think there's a little bit of an ego in there sometimes too. Is like, hey, this is a solution that only I could get to, and how do you get leaders to get comfortable? Because again, this is what I've ran into. Is like when you start talking about simplification, sometimes when that ego gets in the way, leaders start feeling, hey, if we can simplify this to where anybody can do it, then I'm replaceable. And how do you get past that?
The way I do it is through example. And when I work with groups, my approach is not to say, here's what I think makes sense. My approach is to say, guys, this isn't my opinion. This is what the marketplace says works. So let me give you example after example after example of really great leaders that we can all agree are excellent at leadership. And let's just look at the way they all are able to simplify. And then I'll flip the coin and I'll give an example. Oh my gosh, one of my favorites. I had a client years ago, Earl, that called together his, 25 or 30 top people on his leadership team. And he came in and it was, I wish I had a video of it. He was pounding the lectern up where he was speaking, just pounded it. And he kept saying, you guys have to get your people on board. That's where you're not doing a good job. You've got to get your people on board. And he's screaming and foaming at the mouth. And finally he walks out and there's dead silence in the room because everybody's uncomfortable because of the tension. And finally somebody said what everybody was thinking, which was, get them on board with what? Because his great failure as a leader was there was no clarity about the vision and the mission and where they were trying to go. Well, if you make that complicated, then you're dead in the water to start with. Mm-hmm. So I think if you just appeal to people's common sense and experience, and if you say, look, if you want to be a leader on the level of, say, a Steve Jobs of Apple, who was, to me, the ultimate guru of mastering simplicity, then you got to step up your game and you've got to be able to make it simple. But you really do, with some people, you're right, you have to flip their thinking about that.
Well, yeah. And, and I love that. And Steve Jobs is a great example. I know a lot of people are familiar with his he took the simplification as far as his wardrobe. He wore the black turtleneck and the blue jeans.
Exactly.
And, it's been my experiences, again, that when sometimes when leaders have that innate sense of overcomplicating and over-explaining, to me, I read that as a lack of faith in their staff. They don't feel comfortable that they've hired the right people, that if they let them go to their own devices, that maybe they're not going to get to, quote, the correct solution. And to me, that is usually some kind of a signal of the hiring process as well.
Oh, that's an interesting point. That you have to look at your hiring. And when you were talking about that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall seeing a number of times a quote from General George Patton. I can't remember the quote exactly, but it was along the lines of what you were just saying, which was you can either tell people what you expect of them and then explain to them how to do it, or you can be a leader and say, here's the objective. Go do it. Go figure it out. But you raise a great point. In order for a leader to be able to do that, they've got to know they've got the right people. And that does get back to the hiring process. So, yeah, that's an important part of the formula.
Yeah. I mean, that Patton quote is a great one in there. So, one of the things I like to do, I like to inject history. And there's the story of Admiral Nelson. He died at the Battle of Trafalgar. But before that, this was a naval battle. And up until this point, it was very complicated. There was flag signals, and the boats had to be, these were the old tall ships, and they had to be in a certain position so they could receive the flag signals. And everything was very rigid and structured. And going into the Battle of Trafalgar, he was outnumbered, he was outgunned, he was outmanned. By all the rules of classical naval warfare, this thing was over. He was dead. It was just a formality of firing the cannons. But he gathered his captains from each one of the ships beforehand, and the guidance he gave them was, no captain can do wrong that pulls themselves alongside the enemy vessel.
Oh, wow.
That was his orders.
Love that.
And he died. He got shot through the spine, I think it was 30 minutes into the battle. But because he left them with those clear, simple instructions, they were able to go on and win, even after he died.
And I say the same thing in business. I'll see a CEO or an executive get up on stage in front of all the leaders or even all the employees and talk for an hour about the 27 things that we've got to do in the next year. And if that's their approach, you can almost bet that these people are not going to have a good year. But then there's the leader who gets up in front of everybody and she'll say, folks, we got to do 3 things. And by the way, I'm a huge fan. And I do this in my leadership workshops. I'm a huge fan of getting people to boil what they want to achieve down to getting 3 things right. Mm-hmm. And I've got lots of examples that I use with them on how that works. But if you can say, folks, there's 3 things that we have to do. And if we do those 3 things well, if we do them consistently with excellence, we'll be fine. Because people can wrap their head around 3 things. But it's really difficult to wrap your head around. It's like when people say, well, we have 14 priorities. Well, if you've got 14, then you don't have any. Mm-hmm. You can't have 14 priorities. It just doesn't work that way.
It was like, so I don't know if you ever saw a TV show called Parks and Rec.
Yeah, I did. It was
okay. Good. Well, so you may know where I'm going. There was a character on there, Ron Swanson, and one of his quotes was, never half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing. And I thought, that was written for comedy, but it's profound because we try to do that a lot. We try to multitask. We try to make everything a priority. We try to triage instead of plan. And the neuroscience is in. Humans can't multitask. They think they can. Yeah. But when you look at the neuroscience, all we do is rapidly flip back and forth between tasks. We don't multitask.
It's funny. I keep flipping in this conversation. My mind keeps flipping to different quotes and metaphors and sayings. And when you were giving me that last one, I thought about an old Chinese kind of a proverb. And it's about the man who chases many rabbits. The one thing you know for sure is he's not going to catch any rabbits.
Right.
And it's funny, though, that is a great metaphor because I think a lot of people could probably relate to that. They feel like as they go through the course of the day, they're chasing a whole bunch of rabbits. And if you're chasing a bunch of them, you're not going to catch any of them. So, Yeah, this I tell you, I'm such a fan of the power of clarity and the power of focus. You show me a team that shares a team focus on one thing, and I'm not going to bet against them. I'm just not, because a shared focus is incredibly effective, and good leaders can help make that happen.
Well, yeah, and there's no better example, and I use them a lot. When you look at fast food, Chick-fil-A. I mean, they're a perfect example of what you're talking about. Their menu is simple. They do chicken. Sure, it comes in various sizes and forms, but they do chicken. They do it really well. They've got a solid culture. If you go to one Chick-fil-A, the experience is going to be what it is at every other Chick-fil-A you've ever been to.
Yeah.
And they compete, and literally with one arm tied behind their back. They aren't open on Sundays, which
They're
is
closed on Sunday, for Pete's sake. They're a fast food restaurant.
And they stay closed on like Super Bowl Sunday, which is one of the best days of the year to sell chicken.
Yeah. And I think I read recently an article comparing sales per square foot of fast food restaurants, and they sell more per square foot than any other fast food restaurant in the country.
Right.
They're just so, well, you can drive by any Chick-fil-A, and normally you will see a long line of cars waiting to go through.
Yep. And again, I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that power of simplicity, that power of the culture. You can't talk to a Chick-fil-A employee that doesn't know what's expected of them. And they have a very low turnover rate. Chick-fil-A hardly fires people.
Yeah.
You either fit in or you don't. No harm, no foul. You just fit in or you move on.
Yeah, and you know something? It's interesting, going back to what you just said about Chick-fil-A, about that uniformity and consistency. Not that they're a bunch of clones, because they're not. You'll see all sorts of personalities in a Chick-fil-A, but they do have some things in common. It's like Southwest Airlines hires people that know how to have fun, how to have fun with each other, and how to have fun with passengers. Chick-fil-A hires people who want to be gracious and courteous and welcoming to customers. But one thing that I like to use as kind of a test is that I should be able to go to any employee in your company and say, so what are you guys all about here? What's the point? What are you trying to do? And I tell you, at a lot of companies, maybe even most of them, that employee would look at me and say, what do you mean? What are we all about? What kind of question is that? But at the really good companies, they'll say, I'll tell you exactly what we're about. And they might not, as a matter of fact, at the best ones, they won't give you some canned, memorized, pitch, but they will all say the same thing, because they're all on the same page and they're all going in the same direction with the same goal.
Right. Well, no, and as you were explaining it, like the other company that popped in my head was Zappos, and what I loved about Zappos when they started was they said they didn't want to be a shoe company with great customer service. They wanted to be a great customer service company that sold shoes.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we could tell Zappos stories for 3 hours solid. I mean, what an amazing organization. And all of that comes straight down from Tony Hsieh, the CEO who started Zappos. And credit to Amazon, when Amazon bought Zappos, they pretty much left them alone as far as their culture and their leadership, which was a very, very smart thing for them to do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So hopefully after, a few minutes here talking about it, our listeners have really understood and grasped this power of simplicity. But just in case they haven't, is there anything that we've missed that you think that they should know about why simplicity is such a great thing to embrace?
Well, one more example pops in my head, which is an example and a quote. The quote is this, and I love this. It's old. I mean, it's from like the medieval times. And if I looked in my files, I could tell you who the author was, and I would love to give him credit, but I can't recall his name right now. But he said, you're not finished when you've added everything that you can add. You're finished when you've taken away everything that you can take away. And I love that, because a lot of the companies that I work with fall into the trap of saying, hey, you know what else we could do? And now that can be a good thing. I mean, you don't want to be blind to new opportunities, but a lot of us fall into the trap of thinking that whoever does the most generally wins. And I disagree with that. What I believe is whoever does the most important and does it really well, that's who usually wins. And all of that to me gets back to, let's simplify what we're about. Let's simplify what we're trying to accomplish, and let's simplify how we're going to go about getting it done.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's why I believe, there's a lot of people who have done a lot of good work. Simon Sinek has written a bunch of books and articles and stuff about why, find your why. But I really believe that what you just said is a good reason as to why is the first question we learn to ask as kids. And it's still the most powerful question, because I truly believe if you ask why enough, you'll get to that simplicity.
I agree. If more people, I've started saying their work life, but this applies to your personal life as well. If more people would do exactly that and say, well, wait a second, let's get clear. Why are we doing this? And if everybody would give more thought to that, what is it? What's our ultimate goal that we're trying to accomplish? They would be a lot more effective, because a lot of times we confuse activity with productivity. And sometimes there's a big, big difference between those two.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it goes back to some of the Stephen Covey, works with the prioritization, and I was listening to one of your videos getting ready for this and heard you talk about, when you go into an organization and they talk about they've got, a list of this, and this to do, but there's no priority. There's no what is actually important and what can get pushed to the side, and how do you clean up that clutter? And it comes back to that. It's like, why are we here? What are we doing? And the answers to those questions are clarifying. They help you prioritize, right?
Well, yeah, and they help they help show you the difference between busy and productive. Because you can be busy all day long and not accomplish anything meaningful. Believe me, I've been there and done that.
Oh, yeah.
I've been crazy busy and not really gotten much done that mattered. I think that why and the simplicity, really important leadership factors.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people miss about goals and goal setting. I tell people, yes, go through all the exercises out there for your goals and goal setting, but the one thing that having your goals clearly thought out does is it gives you that clarifying question. Does this move me closer to my goal? If yes, proceed. If no, I'm not going to say don't do it, but you really need to have a deeper thought about whether you need to do it or not.
Man, that's such a great point, and it brings up an idea that I heard from a friend of mine years ago. And I talk about this a lot, but I had never talked about it using these words. He said, what you're doing is you're making decisions in advance. So that when something comes up, should I do this or should I do this? You go, wait a minute, we've already thought this through. We're going to do the thing that will best advance our strategy and get us towards our goal. There's a fabulous example that I use all the time about Great Britain had an 8-man rowing team in the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney. And they came up with, I call it a filter system. And this system was a question. It's kind of a why question, but it's even more specific. The question was, will it make the boat go faster? And so think about that. Think about how powerful that is. With every single decision they made, even down to, of course, there's the obvious ones like, how do we train? What equipment do we use? but even down to what do we eat? How do we sleep? They would always say, will it make the boat go faster? And if it didn't, then they knew they were on the wrong track. So I love that metaphor. I use it in my own business all the time.
Yeah, well, no, that's good. I mean, because that's why they're there, right? That's why they exist, to
exactly
have the fastest boat.
That's the point.
Yeah, no, that is great. I hadn't heard that story before, so thanks for sharing.
Well, there's a book by that title written by one of the members of the Olympic team. It's called "Will It Make the Boat Go Faster?" I've read it. It's a great lesson in leadership and teamwork.
Oh, well, I am going to write that down real quick.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Okay. Well, look, so again, we've talked quite a bit about simplicity and all that. We kind of mentioned your books in the beginning, but one of the things that you do, and I don't know how big of a piece of your business it is, but it seems like a pretty decent portion, is you call them the Next Success workshops. Yeah. So first of all, the name, that's an interesting name, Next Success. What does that mean?
Yeah, I tell you, it really came from a combination of my own experience and then some other people that I personally knew. And the situation was, well, in my case, for example, there were things that I had done, and I had done them well, and they had worked to a certain degree. By the way, let me also say I've got more than my share of things that didn't work. But that's just part of the journey, I think. But I look at people that did well and were successful, and yet something in them said, I know there's a next thing for me. And the phrase just popped in my head. You're thinking about what's your next success. And the same thing holds true for a lot of my leadership. I work with teams of leaders doing workshops to help them get focused and get clarity and move on to the next level. And so there are entire companies that are in search of their next success, or some people call it taking it to the next level. But that's really what the idea is. And my tagline is that I help successful people and successful leadership teams think through, strategize, and take action on their next success. You know, the one thing I like about the phrase is it's just got such a positive spin to it when you say next success. It's this idea of, yeah, there's more, and I'm capable of more, and I want to challenge myself, and I want to bump it up a notch. So that's really what both my workshops and my coaching are all about, is how do you get to your next success, and what's that going to look like?
No, I like that. And so there's two things I want to touch on there with your answer. Like the first one you hit, and I hope people heard it, and I hope they really latch on to it. But you mentioned failures, right? Failures, it's such a critical part of success. And I'm going to admit, I had to look this up because I want to get it right. But there's a famous quote from Michael Jordan, and I want to get all these numbers right. He says, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed." And it's like, boom. You know, I mean, sure, success is always the goal, but it doesn't always happen the way you think it's going to happen, right?
No. Oh, my gosh. You know, it's funny. The greatest race driver, certainly one of the greatest race drivers in history, was Mario Andretti. And I love a quote from him. He said, if everything feels like it's under control, you're not going fast enough.
I like that. I like that.
That kind of gets to the idea of you've got to stretch, and you've got to be willing to learn and to gain information, for example, from the marketplace. And to do that, you've got to put stuff out there. You've got to try things. And sometimes it's not going to work. But when it doesn't work, you get information. And you go, okay, now I've got more input. Now I know how to adjust. Now I know that I need to change direction. And I don't think you can point to any successful person in any field or any endeavor that if you were to ask them all, have you ever failed? They'll just start laughing and say, it's like Michael Jordan. They'll say, have I ever failed? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course now we're getting into cliche stuff, which is, it's not about, it's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many times you get back up. Right. But that's a cliche because it's true. And so, there is an element of failure. And I openly talk about my things that I've tried in my career that just, going in, I thought it was the greatest idea in the world. And as it turned out, I was the only one.
Well, I think, like you said, I think we've all been there. Anybody who's, again, you talk about cliches. I'm trying to remember exactly how the one goes. The quote about anybody, the only person who's never failed is the person who's never tried.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
But I tell you, the other thing I liked about the name Next Success is, to me, it's almost like a challenge, right? Because a lot of times people have success, and for some people, it's like, okay, I've succeeded, and now the pack is off. I'm here. I'm good.
Yeah.
Now, for some people, that's perfectly fine.
Yep, that can be.
But what's next? What's the next thing? What can you do better? Now, word of caution to people out there are people who get kind of like chronically ill with the next thing. So you got to be careful with that. But, once you have success, it's not bad to ask yourself, what is my next success going to be? What can I build on to make either this better or something different better?
And to do that, you've got to be willing to risk. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing. In my last book was called The Leadership Mindset. And in it, I quote a bank CEO of this bank and him have been clients of mine for a long, long time. And this is, oh my gosh, these guys, this bank is so successful and they do so well. And this CEO was being interviewed, and the question was, you guys try a lot of new things in the marketplace. What's your success rate? Now, this is a bank. Banks are by nature conservative creatures. Part of it they have to be because of regulation, because of their fiduciary responsibility to their customers. But he said, and I love this, he said, we probably succeed about half the time on the things that we try to do. And he said it without apology and with just surety and confidence. But he said it with the confidence that comes from being a really good, strong leader. But I love that. He said, yeah, we probably fail about half the time with what we try. And I just think most people in leadership positions feel, at least to a certain extent, that way, that they're willing to risk to get to the next level.
Yeah, well, and there's a gentleman who I think, I love what you said there. There's a gentleman who I think is kind of leading the way in preaching that specifically, the try, fail, move on. And that's Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yep, exactly.
And he talks about, sure, he goes, I try every new social media app that comes out of the market. I'm one of the first people to download it. I try it. If it's got legs, I stick with it. If it doesn't, I move on to the next one. And there's always going to be a next one. But one of them's going to work, and it's going to be worth all of the other stuff I invested in the failure.
Yeah, exactly. I work with a lot of startups, and for entrepreneurs, particularly in a startup situation, what I tell them is I say, look, you are largely in an information gathering phase because you've got an idea, you're going to take it to market, and you are, as I was saying earlier, and you are going to gather information because it's probably not going to be a home run when you first roll it out. There's going to be some stuff that doesn't work. There's going to be some stuff that's wrong with it. And that's okay. It's part of the information gathering process. And so you go back, you adjust. I've got a friend, he even wrote a book by this title. I love this old saying. I think you'll like this. Here it is. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing wrong. And the idea behind that is if you wait until, we touched on this earlier, if you wait until you are 100% sure it's absolutely going to work, then you'll probably never do it. And if you never do it, it's a potentially good idea wasted. So do it wrong, then do it better.
Well, and that goes back, you mentioned Patton earlier. One of his other famous quotes is a good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan executed next week.
I've got to say this because it's bouncing around in my mind. We're talking about taking risks. And I keep flashing on the scene from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where their last resort to get away is to jump off a cliff into a river 200 feet below. And the Sundance Kid, Robert Redford, admits to Paul Newman, Butch Cassidy, he says, I can't swim. And Butch Cassidy just starts laughing his head off and says, can't swim? Hell, the fall will probably kill you.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that. That's a great scene in the movie, too.
But sometimes you just have to jump.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, and the other thing is, right, is we've talked a lot about the keep it simple and find your next success and all that, but you're not the only person doing it, right? So if you wait until it's perfect for you, somebody else is already in the market. Somebody's
already there. They tried it, they adjusted, and now it's theirs.
Yeah. And all that preparation. Again, I love infusing history, and it's the Civil War, right? General McClellan, during the Civil War for the Union, was by all accounts the better general. But Grant was the one that actually took the Army and put them to use.
Yeah.
And that's the key. I mean, that's the key. You can plan, but
McClellan planned forever.
Yeah. He planned, he marched, he groomed, he had the inspection ready, but they never used. And it goes back to modern, I believe it was Eisenhower, that said everybody's got a plan until the bullets start flying.
That's right. Yeah.
And so all you can do is be prepared and be nimble and adjust. And again, we come back to that's why simplicity is amazing, because the more simplistic the plan, the easier it's to adapt.
That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, wow! I never thought of it that way. I'm going to write that one down. I'm stealing that from you, my friend.
Yeah, there you go. It's my gift for being a guest.
There you go. No, that's a great way to look at it. The simpler the plan, the easier it is to adjust, the easier it is to execute. Yeah, all of that.
Yeah. So, okay, we started talking about the workshops, the Next Success workshops, and we kind of got into the name and all that. So, if an organization is sitting here thinking about pulling the trigger, what can they expect? What do you help them through during the workshop?
Yeah, and I'll tell you the way we do it. It's not a speech. I do this. I generally work with groups of 10 or fewer. I'll work with a leadership team, and we sit around a table, and the client provides the venue and the table, and I work with them beforehand, the CEO or whoever, and talk to them about, okay, what are the issues? What's top of mind for you guys? And a lot of the times, Earl, the main one is we know we need to bump it up a notch. And a lot of times they will say, but we feel like we're a little bit scattered. We could do much better with the resources and the people that we've got if we were better focused. Sometimes they'll say, we need to get a handle on our culture. Because that's a huge hot button of mine. If your culture's not right, it's not going to work. I don't care what you're trying to do. If your culture's out of whack, and if you're not in alignment as far as values and purpose, then it's just not going to work. So what I do is I lead a discussion that we all take part in, and I'll ask them questions, and I'll say, okay, you guys talk about this for a minute. And then we'll come back and we'll open it up to the whole table. And it's a combination of my outside perspective from having worked with a lot of organizations, and a lot of leaders, good ones, bad ones, and passing on those ideas and that perspective combined with their own perspective and their own wisdom and their own leadership ability, and get them to the point that after a 2 or 3 hour discussion, they've got sometimes a basis to move forward with discussions that will start to involve other members of the team, but always with the goal of having more clarity on where they're going and how they're going to get there. So that's basically what it is. It's a workshop, but it's a let's sit around the table workshop. Now, I also offer a version that's more of a classroom style, up to 50 people, but I do want it to be a leadership group. And even with 50 people, though, it's still very, very interactive. And the thing I don't want, Earl, is I don't want people to sit around and think about things theoretically and think, well, okay, that's an interesting idea. That's an interesting idea. I want them thinking about what they're going to do when they go back to work. That's going to be different. That's going to make things more effective. And a phrase that I love that will help them advance their strategy.
And I love that, and I love your approach there. You're talking about having the conversation with, because nothing bugs me more than the being talked to, and I like the interactivity. That's one of the things we try to do, is be very interactive. Sure, do I have a few slides just for background noise? But if I never touch a slide and we have a good conversation, I'm just as happy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, I love it, and I love the conversation we've had, and I will have links to all your information, social media, your website, and folks, we've been talking about simplicity. When you see Joe's website, and this is not a negative thing, this is a beautiful thing. Joe's website is one of the sleekest, simple, streamlined, impactful websites I think I've ever seen. You have there's essentially 3 tabs: home, books, blog. Boom.
Yeah, and a lot of people never get past home, which is fine. When I tore my website down about 3 months ago and put up this brand new one, and my number one goal with Brian, my web designer, was, Brian, I want this to be the simplest website in the history of the internet. And you can just scroll down, and it's pretty short, and you can see everything there is to see in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. And speaking of the blog piece, I get most people don't get past the homepage, but there's a lot of good stuff in the blog. And you talk about, Brian, and some stuff you've written recently about the amazing, simple, overlooked advantage. And I'm going to I'll maybe at least embed a link to part 1, because I think everybody needs to read that blog post.
I'd love that. Thank you. That'd be great.
Well, look, Joe, man, this has been a pleasure. I know, we're coming up on 45 minutes here. It seems like time has flown. It's been great talking with you. I'm going to have to say this is one of my favorite conversations. Sorry, Dov, if you're listening. I love you too, guy, but this has been a great Tennessean here. But I always like to I have one question I like to ask in the beginning, and I have one question I like to ask at the end.
Okay.
Is there anything we haven't discussed yet that you would like to share with the audience?
The thing that pops into my mind is, remember, I would ask and advise everybody listening, always remember what's most important to you personally. What do you value most? And a lot of people, for example, this isn't the only answer, it's just one answer, but some people would say family. Well, if family is what matters most, make sure that your life and the way you work is in alignment with that value. And that would hold true for whatever your answer is. I think just having clarity about what's most important to you and what you value most. And that's a form of making things simple. But I think it's really important to think about that, and then truly live your life in alignment with whatever that value is.
That is good stuff. That is definitely good stuff. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Mr. Calloway for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. As I've said, I'm going to have his contact information on the show notes so you can get in touch with him. If you have anything for me, I'm easy to reach, just burden.command@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, if you have a guest you'd like to hear me interview, hit me up there. And I just want to thank you for spending the last 45 minutes or so with Joe and I, and we'll talk with you again in the next episode.